Chapter 1. The coin left behind the diner smelled of burnt coffee and broken promises. Elena wiped down the counter for the third time that hour, her movements mechanical, her mind somewhere far away. 3 months since the scandal. 3 months since, her name had been splashed across every gossip site in the city. Art curator caught in forgery scheme. Never mind that she'd been the one who'd discovered the fraud. Never mind that her mentor had thrown her to the wolves to save his own reputation. The art world had a short memory for truth and a long one for scandal. Now she worked the graveyard shift at Rosie's diner, serving truckers and insomniacs, trying to rebuild a life from ash and spite. The bell above the door chimed. Elena glanced up, her practiced smile already in place, and felt the words die in her throat. The man who entered moved like smoke given form, fluid, deliberate, impossibly graceful. He wore a black coat that belonged to another century, tailored so perfectly it seemed grown rather than sewn. Dark hair fell just past his collar, and his face held the kind of beauty that made people uncomfortable. The kind that suggested danger, wrapped in elegance, but it was his eyes that stopped her breath, pale silver gray. Ancient and assessing, they swept the empty diner with the practiced vigilance of someone accustomed to cataloging exits and threats. When they landed on her, Elena felt pinned, examined, seen in a way that made her skin prickle. "We're open," she managed, though her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. He didn't smile. He simply moved to a booth by the window, the darkest corner of the diner, and sat with his back to the wall. Every movement economical, controlled. Like a predator conserving energy between hunts, Elena approached with her notepad, fighting the urge to maintain distance. Up close, he was even more unsettling. His skin held an odd pallor, luminous in the fluorescent lights. No visible pores, no imperfections, like carved marble given warmth. "Coffee?" she offered. "Tea, if you have it." His voice carried an accent she couldn't place, something old world, European, softened by centuries into something uniquely his own. "We have chamomile or English breakfast." "English breakfast. No milk." She wrote it down, grateful for something normal to focus on. "Anything to eat?" No, the word was final, offered without explanation or apology. Elena nodded and retreated to the kitchen, her hands shaking slightly as she filled the kettle. Through the service window, she watched him. He sat utterly still, his gaze fixed on the street beyond the glass, not fidgeting, not checking a phone, just waiting, like a statue, like something carved from time itself. "You're being ridiculous," she told herself. "He's just a customer. A weird, incredibly beautiful, vaguely unsettling customer." She brought the tea, setting it carefully on the table. He didn't acknowledge her, didn't reach for the cup, just continued his vigil, those pale eyes tracking something she couldn't see. Elena returned to the counter, but found herself glancing over repeatedly. Something about him nagged at her trained eye, the way artists throughout history had tried to capture immortality in paint and failed. He had that quality. That sense of being outside time, untouched by the mundane entropy that wore down ordinary humans. In our past. The tea sat untouched, cooling, forgotten. He never moved. A T2 in the morning, he finally rose. Elena straightened, expecting him to approach the register, but he simply adjusted his coat and walked toward the door. "Sir?" she called. "You need to pay." He paused, turned. For the first time, something like emotion crossed his face, a flicker of amusement, quickly suppressed. "Of course. Forgive me." He returned to the booth, and Elena approached with her pad. When she reached the table, she saw it, a worn leather wallet, deliberately placed where he'd been sitting. "You forgot," she started. No, he met her gaze, and she felt caught, held fast by the intensity. "There, I didn't forget." Before she could process that, he was gone. The bell chimed once, and the night swallowed him whole. Elena stood frozen, staring at the wallet. Her hand hovered over it, uncertainty warring with curiosity. "This is a test," some instinct whispered. "He's watching to see what you do." She looked toward the window, half expecting to see him standing there in the darkness. The street was empty, but she could feel it, the weight of observation, the certainty that she was being assessed by forces beyond her understanding. Slowly, carefully, Elena picked up the wallet. The leather was soft, aged, expensive, real craftsmanship, the kind that lasted centuries rather than seasons. She opened it, preparing to find a driver's license or credit card. What she found instead made her breath catch. No plastic, no identification, Just crisp bills, hundreds, easily $2,000, and tucked behind them, a card. Not laminated, not modern. Cream-colored paper, thick and textured, with words written in elegant script. House Ashvale, Court of Eternal Nightan below that. In the same flowing hand, he who carries this name is owed blood debt by 3 crowned houses, and feared by all who remember the old laws. Elena's hands trembled. This was insane. This was the bell chimed again. She spun, expecting him. But it was just the wind, pushing the door open an inch before it swung shut. Take it to the police, reason demanded. This is weird. This is wrong. But her fingers closed around the wallet, and she thought of those eyes, ancient and assessing. Of the way he'd moved, like gravity itself bent around him. Of the test he'd left behind. The art world had taught her one thing: know your patrons. Understand what they want before they ask. And this man, this impossible, unsettling man, wanted to know if she could be trusted, if she was brave enough to walk into darkness. Elena tucked the wallet into her apron and returned to the counter. She didn't know what she'd just chosen. Didn't know that her life had already changed. That the moment she'd decided to keep that wallet safe, she'd stepped into a world where the rules she knew no longer applied. Outside, in the shadows between streetlights, Adrian Ashvale smiled. She'd passed the first test. Chapter 2. The Returnalina's shift ended at 6, when the morning crew arrived and the diner filled with the scent of frying bacon and the chatter of early risers. She clocked out with the wallet still tucked against her ribs, its weight both physical and metaphorical. She should have turned it into her manager. Should have filed it in the lost and found box beneath the register, alongside forgotten umbrellas and cheap sunglasses. Instead, she carried it home. Her apartment was a studio on the 4th floor of a building that had seen better decades. 1 room, 1 window, and a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. The opposite of her old life, when she'd lived in a converted loft in the arts district. Surrounded by beauty and light, that felt like someone else's memory now. Elena locked the door behind her, engaged the deadbolt, and only then allowed herself to truly examine what she'd taken. In the gray morning light filtering through her window, the wallet seemed almost ordinary. Just leather and money and an odd card. But she remembered those eyes, that stillness, and knew she was holding something that mattered. Something dangerous. She photographed the card with her phone, zoomed in on the script. House Ashvale, Court of Eternal Night. The words meant nothing to her, but they carried weight, formality. Like the titles given to noble families in history books. Blood debt. That phrase bothered her most. It suggested violence, obligation, a world where debts weren't settled with money, but with something far more primal. Elena set the wallet on her kitchen counter and stared at it while coffee brewed. She'd expected what? For it to vanish? For him to materialize in her apartment, furious that she'd taken it. Nothing happened. The city woke around her, oblivious. By noon, exhaustion pulled her towards sleep, but her mind refused to quiet. She kept seeing him, that perfect stillness, those ancient eyes, kept feeling the weight of being tested, examined, chosen for something she didn't understand. Finally, she slept, and dreamed of shadows that moved with purpose, of a voice speaking her name in the darkness, of eyes like winter moons, watching from places where no one should be able to stand. When she woke, it was evening again, and the wallet sat exactly where she'd left it. Elena showered, dressed, made herself eat something that might charitably be called dinner. Then she picked up the wallet, slipped it into her bag, and headed to work. The diner was busier tonight. A few regulars, a couple fighting quietly in the corner booth, a trucker nursing his 3rd cup of coffee while he waited for his rig to be serviced. Elena fell into the rhythm of it, grateful for the distraction, but she kept glancing at the door. 10 o'clock came and went. 11, midnight. He didn't appear. By 1 in the morning, Elena had convinced herself she'd imagined the entire thing. That exhaustion and stress had painted significance onto an ordinary encounter. Maybe he'd simply forgotten his wallet. Maybe the card was some kind of calling card for an exclusive club, or a prop from a film shoot. Maybe she was losing her mind. At T1:30, the bell chimed. Elena looked up, and there he was, same black coat, same impossible grace. But this time, when he entered, she saw what she'd missed before: the way the other customers unconsciously leaned away from him, the subtle widening of eyes, the primal recognition that something apex had entered their space. He moved directly to the counter, ignoring the empty booths, You kept it safe, he said. Not a question. A statement of fact, delivered with quiet satisfaction. Elena's hand went to her bag beneath the counter. I was going to call the police. Turn it in. But you didn't. Know why? She met his gaze, refusing to flinch despite the way her pulse hammered. Because you left it on purpose. Because you wanted to see what I'd do with it. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but close. Approval, perhaps. Or interest? Most people would have stolen the money. Most people didn't spend 10 years authenticating art for collectors who'd destroy them for admitting a piece was fake. She pulled the wallet from her bag, set it on the counter between them. I know a test when I see one. He didn't reach for it. Instead, he studied her with that unnerving intensity, as though cataloging every detail of her face, her posture, her hands. You've been hurt recently, betrayed by someone you trusted. It wasn't a question, but Elena answered anyway. 3 months ago, my mentor framed me for his crimes. I lost everything, and yet you didn't steal from me. Stealing would make me what they said I was, even when no one would know. I would know. The silence that followed felt weighted, significant. Around them, the diner's ambient noise seemed muted, distant, as though they existed in a pocket separate from the ordinary world. Finally, he reached for the wallet, his fingers brushing hers as he took it. His skin was cool, not cold, but absent of warmth, like marble that had sat in shadow. Elena jerked back reflexively. He noticed. Of course he noticed. You have questions, he said. Several thousand. Ask one. Elena swallowed, chose her words carefully. What are you? His lips curved, the first real smile she'd seen from him, and it was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Perceptive. Most wouldn't dare ask so directly. Most wouldn't have been tested with a wallet full of cash and cryptic cards. Fair. He tilted his head, considering. What do you think I am? She wanted to laugh, to dismiss the thought forming in her mind as ridiculous. But she'd learned to trust her instincts about art, about authenticity. Those same instincts screamed that this man was not human, could not be human. The card mentioned blood debt, she said carefully. And you move like gravity doesn't affect you the same way. Like you're not bound by normal rules. Go on, and you're too still. Humans fidget. They breathe heavily, shift weight, blink regularly. You don't. His smile widened fractionally. Excellent observation. So either you're some kind of theatrical performer with incredible body control, or she stopped, the word too absurd to speak aloud, or, he prompted. Elena forced herself to say it. Or you're something that shouldn't exist. Both can be true. He leaned forward slightly, and she caught a glimpse of something sharp when his lips parted. I am very old, Elena Markov. Old enough to remember when this city was farmland and forest. Old enough to have watched empires rise and crumble into dust. Her name in his mouth sent ice down her spine. I never told you my name. No, but I've been watching you for 3 weeks. Since the night you stood outside your old gallery and didn't throw a brick through the window, though you wanted to. Since you chose dignity over revenge. That's terrifying. Invasive? Impossible. Why? Because I need someone I can trust. He straightened, becoming once again that pillar of controlled elegance. Someone with integrity. Someone who understands the value of authenticity in a world of beautiful lies. For what? His eyes held hers, and she saw centuries there, layers of experience and grief and carefully controlled power. To help me survive what's coming. And perhaps, if you're brave enough, to survive alongside me. The trucker in the corner stood, threw cash on his table, and left. The couple had gone quiet, watching them with barely concealed unease. Elena's hands gripped the counter. You haven't actually told me what you are. No, he agreed. But you already know. You simply fear speaking it aloud, because once you do, your world changes forever. The question is, are you brave enough to name the truth? She thought of the wallet, the test, the deliberate care he'd taken to find someone worthy. Thought of his stillness, his pallor, the way shadows seemed to cling to him like loyal subjects. Vampire. Elena whispered. Adrian Ashvale's smile was radiant and cold as winter stars. Welcome, he said, to the night. Chapter 3. The threshold. Elena's apartment had never felt so exposed. She stood at her window, watching the street for floors below, seeing it differently now. Every shadow held potential threat. Every stranger could be something other than human. The world had cracked open, revealing depths she'd never imagined. Adrian Ashvale was a vampire. She'd said it aloud in the diner, watched his confirmation settle over them like falling snow. Then he'd done something worse than threaten her. He'd asked permission. May I see you home? The streets aren't safe tonight. Not for you. She should have refused. Should have laughed, called the police, done something rational. Instead, she'd nodded, finished her shift under his watchful gaze, and let him follow her through the pre-dawn darkness. He'd stayed silent during the walk, maintaining a careful distance, never touching her, but she'd felt his presence like a live wire at her back, humming with contained power. When they'd reached her building, he'd stopped at the threshold. I cannot enter without invitation. Old laws still bind us, even in this modern age. What happens if I don't invite you? I wait here until sunrise. Then I leave, and you never see me again. She'd hesitated, key in hand, every survival instinct screaming. But curiosity, that same relentless curiosity that had made her excellent at authenticating art, won out. Why me? Why not someone with power, money, connections? Because those with power are easily corrupted, and I need someone who cannot be bought. His eyes had held hers across the threshold. You were tested, not just with money, Elena, but with choice. You chose integrity when it benefited you. Nothing. That is rare. That is valuable. And if I invite you in, what then? Then I tell you why I need you. And you decide if you're brave enough to help. She'd stepped aside. Come in. Now he stood in her small apartment, seeming to occupy far more space than his physical form should allow. He hadn't moved from where he'd entered, hands clasped behind his back, studying her sparse belongings with that unnerving focus. You kept very little from your old life, he observed. Most of it was taken to cover legal fees. Elena set her bag down, trying to decide where to stand in her own home. The rest I sold. Easier to start over with nothing than to be reminded of what you lost. A pragmatic philosophy. He finally moved, gliding toward her bookshelf. His fingers traced the spine's art history, authentication techniques, a few battered mysteries. But you kept the books. Books don't betray you. No, they simply reveal uncomfortable truths. He pulled one out, a text on Renaissance forgery techniques, and flipped through it with obvious familiarity. I knew the man who wrote this. Tedious fellow, but thorough. Elena's breath caught. That was published in 1987. I said I was old. How old? He replaced the book with careful precision. Old enough to have watched Da Vinci paint. Old enough to remember when your science was called alchemy and your medicine was prayer. He turned to face her. Old enough to be very tired, Elena. Something in his voice made her chest tighten. Not the words themselves, but the weight behind them. The exhaustion that comes not from days but from centuries. You said you needed help, she prompted, needing to focus on something concrete. With what? Survival. He moved to her window, looked out at the lightening sky. There are rules among my kind. Houses. We call them. Ancient families bound by blood oaths and older compacts. House Ashvale has existed for 900 years. I am its last living member. What happened to the others? Time, war, betrayal. His reflection in the glass was faint, barely visible. And now House Mordain seeks to erase us entirely, to absorb our territories, our resources, our very name, into their own. Why? Because I refused an alliance through marriage. Because I will not bind myself to their political games. Because I am alone, and they believe me weak. Elena approached slowly, stopping a few feet away. Are you weak? He turned, and something dangerous flickered in those pale eyes. No, but I am outnumbered, and vampire law is clear. Disputes between houses must be settled through official channels. Witnesses, documentation, proof of legitimacy. Understanding dawned. You need someone who can authenticate records, prove your claims. More than that, he stepped closer, and she forced herself to hold her ground. House Mordain has fabricated documents claiming my house's territories were ceded to them centuries ago. They've created an entire archive of false blood oaths, forged signatures, manufactured histories. Without proof of their deception, the court of eternal night will rule in their favor, and you need me to prove their forgeries. Yes. Why would I risk that? Why would I walk into vampire politics? She gestured at him, into this world. When 3 months ago, I nearly destroyed my life over a forgery scandal. Adrian's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Because this time, you'd be proving the truth, not covering it up, but exposing it. Isn't that what you wanted? To show the world you could identify deception? It was a low blow, hitting exactly where she was most vulnerable. Elena turned away, arms crossed. Even if I wanted to help, I don't have access to the equipment. I'd need no lab, no UV lights, no chemical analysis tools. I can provide all of that, and I'd need to see the original documents, study the paper, the ink, the binding techniques. I have copies of their forgeries, and access to my own house, archives for comparison, and it would take weeks, maybe months. And where exactly would I be doing this work? Here? She gestured at her tiny apartment. This place barely fits a bed. Silence fell. When she finally looked back at him, Adrian was watching her with something that might have been hope. I have a manor house, he said quietly, outside the city, large enough for a full laboratory, quiet enough for concentration. You would be safe there, protected by my house's wards. Your wards didn't protect your family. No, but they died in battle, not in their beds. And I've strengthened the defenses since. He paused. I won't lie to you, Elena. This is dangerous. House Mordain will discover you're helping me, and they will try to stop you. They may threaten you. They may offer you money to walk away, or forge documents in their favor. And if I refuse? His jaw tightened. Then they may try to kill you. The words hung in the air like smoke. Elena should run, should scream, should do anything but what she was considering. Instead, she thought of her old life, of standing outside the gallery that had been her dream, and watching strangers hang new exhibitions, of knowing the truth and being powerless to prove it, of 3 months working graveyard shifts, invisible and forgotten. If I do this, she said slowly, I have conditions. Adrian inclined his head. Name them. Full access to all documents. No secrets. No withheld information. If I'm going to authenticate records, I need complete transparency. Agreed. I work alone in the lab. No hovering. No watching over my shoulder. Agreed. And if at any point I feel unsafe, or discover you've lied to me, I walk away. No guilt, no consequences. He was quiet for a long moment. That last one I cannot guarantee. If you begin this work and House Mordain learns of it, walking away won't protect you. You'll already be marked as my ally. At least he was honest. Elena appreciated that more than false promises. Then I need to know, are you lying to me? Is any of this a manipulation? No, he met her gaze, and she saw something raw there, quickly hidden. I am desperate, Elena. My house dies with me if I cannot stop this. But I will not force you, will not compel you. The choice must be yours, made freely. Dawn was breaking properly now, gold light spilling across her floor. Adrian shifted away from the window, staying in shadow. You need to leave, Elena said. Before the sun, yes. He moved toward the door, then paused. I'll return tomorrow night. If you want to help, be ready to travel. If not, he smiled sadly. Then thank you for the conversation. It's been a long time since someone looked at me and saw a person rather than a monster. He was gone before she could respond, the door clicking shut behind him with inhuman quiet. Elena stood alone in her apartment as sunrise painted everything gold, and tried to decide if she was brave enough or foolish enough to step into the darkness he offered. By noon, she'd made her decision. By evening, she'd packed. Chapter 4. The Minority car that arrived at sunset was not what Elena expected. She'd imagined something gothic and dramatic, a vintage hearse, perhaps, or a black carriage drawn by pale horses. Instead, a sleek sedan pulled up to her building, modern and unremarkable. The driver was human, middle-aged professional. He took her single suitcase without comment and held the door. Adrian was already inside, reading a leather-bound book by the dome light. You came, he said, looking up as she slid in beside him. I did. Second thoughts? Several thousand. Elena buckled her seatbelt, a gesture that felt absurd, given she was sitting next to a creature that had survived centuries. But I meant what I said. I want to prove the truth. He studied her for a moment, then nodded and returned to his book. The driver pulled away from the curb, heading north out of the city. Elena watched the familiar streets give way to highways, then to darker roads winding through forests she'd never explored. The farther they drove, the more the modern world seemed to recede. Fewer streetlights, fewer cars, just trees and darkness, and the occasional glimpse of stars through gaps in the canopy. How far is it? She asked. Another 20 minutes. Adrian closed his book. The manor has been in my family since the 1600s. It's isolated. But that's by design. Privacy is essential for my kind. Do you live there alone? Now, yes. There were others once. My wife, my son. His voice remained level, but she heard the careful control beneath. They're gone. Elena knew better than to offer empty condolences. Instead, she asked, how? House Mordain, though they covered their tracks well. A fire, supposedly accidental. But vampires don't burn easily, and the flames were fed by something alchemical. By the time I returned from court that night, there was nothing left but ash and accusations. They accused you? Of course. Who better to blame than the grieving husband? They claimed I'd staged it for political gain, to win sympathy and consolidate power. His hands tightened on the book. It nearly worked. I was investigated for 3 years. By the time I was cleared, House Mordain had already begun their expansion, claiming I'd abandoned my territories in my grief. How long ago was this? 70 years. The number hit her like cold water. 70 years of grief, of fighting, of watching his family's murderers thrive. I'm sorry. Don't be. He looked at her, and she saw the steel beneath his sorrow. Be useful instead. Help me prove what they've done. That's worth more than sympathy. The car turned onto a long driveway, gravel crunching beneath the tires. Through the trees, Elena caught her first glimpse of the manor. It rose from the darkness like something from a Gothic novel, all stone and steep roof lines, narrow windows glowing with warm light. Not as massive as she'd imagined, but elegant, each line deliberate. A house built to endure centuries, not decades. It's beautiful, she said, despite herself. It's home. Adrian's voice softened almost imperceptibly. Or what remains of one. The driver stopped at the entrance, a heavy wooden door framed by climbing ivy. Adrian exited first, moving with that unsettling grace, and offered his hand to help her out. Elena hesitated, remembering the coolness of his skin from before, but refusing felt childish, cowardly. She took his hand, his fingers closed gently around hers, cool, yes, but not unpleasant, like marble that had sat in evening shade. He released her immediately. Once she was standing, already moving toward the door. Inside, the manor exhaled the scent of old wood and older secrets. The entry hall stretched upward to stories, lit by a chandelier that had to be original to the house. Portraits lined the walls, men and women in period dress, their painted eyes following her progress. Your family? Elena asked. Some. Others are simply people I knew. Artists need subjects, and I've sat for rather a lot of portraits over the years. He gestured to a painting of a young man in Renaissance garb. That one's actually me, painted in Florence, 1502. She moved closer, studying the brushwork. The style was familiar. She'd authenticated enough Renaissance pieces to recognize the technique. This is genuine. Of course it's genuine. I sat for 6 hours while Raphael complained about the light. Elena's head snapped toward him. Raphael? As in, yes, temperamental genius, terrible sense of time, made the most extraordinary red pigment I've ever seen. Adrian smiled at her expression. You're going to have to adjust your sense of history, Elena. I didn't just read about these periods. I lived them. The implications made her dizzy. The documents I'll be examining, you'll be able to verify their authenticity from personal experience. For some, yes. Others predate even me. But I have detailed family records, letters, account books, enough to cross-reference against Mordain's forgeries. Where's the laboratory? Eager to begin? Eager to see what I'm working with. His smile widened. This way. He led her through halls that whispered with history, past rooms furnished with pieces that belonged in museums, a music room with a harpsichord, a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, a dining room with a table that could seat 20. Do you ever use these rooms? Elena asked. Sometimes. When I need to remember what it felt like to have a house full of voices. He paused at a door near the back of the manor. But mostly I work. Which brings us here. He opened the door to reveal a space that had clearly been modernized. White walls, fluorescent lighting, stainless steel tables. Equipment she recognized: UV lights, microscopes, chemical analysis stations. Everything she'd need and more. This was a ballroom once, Adrian explained. I converted it 30 years ago when I began building my case against Mordain. I've acquired every tool I could think of, but I'm not an expert. You'll need to tell me if anything's missing. Elena moved through the space, cataloging. It was better equipped than some university labs she'd worked in. This must have cost a fortune. I've had 900 years to accumulate wealth. Money is the least of my concerns. He crossed to a filing cabinet along one wall. The documents are here. Copies of everything Mordain has submitted to the court, plus my own house records for comparison. She joined him as he pulled out the first file. Inside were photographs of aged parchment, elaborate calligraphy, wax seals, beautiful, official-looking documents, claiming various territories and rights. These are the forgeries? Elena asked. I believe so, but I need you to prove it. He handed her the file. Take your time. Be thorough. The court hearing is in 6 weeks. If we can't demonstrate these are false by then, House Ashvale ceases to exist. 6 weeks. It was a tight timeline, but manageable if she focused. Elena set the file on the nearest table, already mentally organizing her approach. I'll need the originals eventually. Photographs only tell you so much. They're kept in Mordane's vault. But there will be an examination period before the hearing, 3 days when both houses can inspect the evidence. I'll arrange for you to have access then. And until then, you work here. Study the copies, familiarize yourself with the claim timeline, identifying consistencies. He moved toward the door. I'll have Mrs. Chen bring you dinner. Your room is on the 2nd floor. 3rd door on the right. If you need anything, wait. Elena looked up from the documents. You're leaving? You said no hovering. No watching over your shoulder. His expression was carefully neutral. I'm giving you space to work. I meant during analysis. I didn't mean. She gestured vaguely. This is your house, your case. I just got here, and you need time to adjust. To feel safe. He studied her with that unnerving intensity. I am a predator, Elena. No matter how civilized I appear, that doesn't change. You're safer when I maintain distance. At least until you're comfortable. The consideration in his voice surprised her. How will I find you if I need something? Mrs. Chen knows where I am. Or he pulled a phone from his pocket, modern and incongruous in his ancient hands. I do have a cell phone. Contrary to popular fiction, we've adapted to technology quite well. Despite the strangeness of everything, Elena smiled. A vampire with a smartphone. How else would I order delivery? The corner of his mouth quirked. Though I suppose my dietary restrictions limit the options, it was the closest thing to a joke she'd heard from him. Elena found herself relaxing fractionally. You have a sense of humor. I've had centuries to develop one. It helps with the crushing weight of immortality. He moved to the door, paused. Thank you, Elena, for coming. For trusting me enough to try. I haven't proved anything yet. No, but you're here. That's more than I've had in a very long time. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with centuries of history and the weight of a house's survival on her shoulders. Elena looked down at the documents spread before her, took a deep breath, and began. Chapter 5. The observation. Elena worked through the night, barely noticing when Mrs. Chen, a kind-faced woman in her 60s, brought soup and tea. The documents consumed her attention, each photograph revealing new layers of deception. The forgeries were good, exceptional, even. Whoever had created them understood period paper, authentic aging techniques, the subtle variations in medieval calligraphy. But they'd made mistakes. Small ones, the kind only someone with her specific expertise would catch. A seal that used heraldry introduced 50 years after the document's supposed date. Ink composition that didn't match the claim period. Handwriting that mimicked 14th century style, but included letter formations that didn't exist until the 15th. Details. Always the details betrayed the lie. By the time dawn light crept through the laboratory windows, Elena had filled 3 notebooks with observations. Her eyes burned, her shoulders ached, but she felt alive in a way she hadn't since the scandal. This was what she was meant to do, find truth hidden in carefully constructed fiction. You should sleep. She spun, heart hammering. Adrian stood in the doorway, still wearing yesterday's clothes, looking exactly as composed as he had 12 hours ago. I didn't hear you, Elena said, hand pressed to her chest. No, you were focused. He moved into the room, maintaining distance, examining her notebooks from several feet away. Find anything? Some things. She flipped through her notes, energized despite exhaustion. The seal on the 1342 document uses a lion rampant variant that wasn't added to House Mordane's heraldry until 1389, and the parchment grain in this one. She pulled out another. Photograph runs horizontally. Medieval scribes used vertical grain for important documents. Always. You can tell that from photographs? Once you know what to look for, yes. She organized the photos, creating piles. These 3 are definitely forgeries. These 2 I'm uncertain about without chemical analysis. And this one, she held up a photo of an elaborate marriage contract. This one bothers me most. Adrian approached closer, looking over her shoulder. She could feel the coolness radiating from him, the subtle wrongness that marked him as other. But she didn't move away. Why does it bother you? He asked. Because it's almost perfect. The paper's right. The ink's right. The handwriting matches other documents from the period. If I didn't know better, I'd authenticate it. But the content doesn't match the historical record. You said your house never allied with Mordain through marriage. This document claims your grandfather married a Mordain daughter in 145. My grandfather died in 1448, childless. Adrian's voice went flat. I inherited the house from my uncle. Then this document is impossible. Which means either they found an incredibly skilled forger who can replicate period materials perfectly, or she paused. A disturbing thought forming. Or they have access to authentic blank parchment from the period, and are creating new documents using old materials. Adrian finished her thought, his expression grim. That would be problematic. Problematic? It would make authentication nearly impossible. If the materials are genuine, most tests will confirm authenticity. I'd have to prove the content is false through historical record alone. Can you? Elena met his gaze. If you give me access to your family archives, birth records, death certificates, marriage contracts, everything you have, I'll have them brought to you. He was quiet for a moment, studying her face. You look exhausted. You should rest. I'm fine, Elena. His voice held gentle firmness. You're human. You need sleep. The work will still be here this evening. She wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her with a jaw-cracking yawn. Maybe a few hours. Come, I'll show you to your room properly. He led her up the grand staircase, past more portraits of people who'd been dead for centuries. The second floor was quieter, carpeted in deep burgundy that muffled their footsteps. He stopped at the third door on the right, opened it to reveal a bedroom that managed to be both elegant and comfortable. A four-poster bed dominated the space, draped in cream linens. Large windows overlooked the forest, curtains open to the morning light. A writing desk, a wardrobe, a door that led to a private bathroom. This was my daughter's room, Adrian said quietly. Before, Elena turned to him, seeing the carefully controlled grief in his expression. I can stay somewhere else, no? She would have liked you, I think. Would have appreciated someone who values truth as much as you do. He moved to the window, looked out at the trees. Her name was Catherine. She was studying law when she died. Wanted to reform the vampire court system. Make it more just, more humane. How old was she? 63. Young. For our kind. We aged slowly after turning. She still looked 25. His fingers touched the window frame, a rare and guarded gesture. I'd turned her when she was dying of fever. My wife never quite forgave me for that choice. For making our daughter immortal without consulting her first. Elena moved to stand beside him, careful to maintain space. You were trying to save her. I was being selfish. I couldn't face eternity without my child. He glanced at her. Do you know what the worst part of immortality is? Not the bloodlust or the isolation. It's watching everyone you love age and die while you remain unchanged. It's knowing that love itself becomes a liability, because attachment always ends in loss. Then why do it? Why risk caring about anyone? Because the alternative is becoming something hollow, something that exists without truly living. He turned from the window, and she saw something raw in his expression. I've met vampires like that. Centuries old, powerful, completely empty. They've forgotten what it means to feel, to hope, to fear. They're monsters in the truest sense. And you're not? I'm trying not to be. His voice was barely a whisper. Some days are harder than others. The vulnerability in his admission made her chest ache. This wasn't the controlled, elegant vampire who'd tested her with a wallet. This was someone who'd survived centuries of loss and was desperately trying to hold on to his humanity. You should sleep too, Elena said. Don't vampires need to rest during the day? Need is a strong word. We're weaker in daylight, more vulnerable. Sleep comes easier. But I've learned to push through if necessary. He straightened, rebuilding his composure like armor. Though you're right, I should rest. If you need anything, Mrs. Chen is in the kitchen. She's human, fully aware of what I am, and has worked for my family for 40 years. Does she know about the case? She knows everything. Her discretion is absolute. Elena nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of exhaustion crushing down. Thank you. For the room. for trusting me with this. Thank you for being trustworthy. He moved to the door, paused. One more thing. The manor has wards, protective enchantments that prevent hostile vampires from entering. You're safe here. But if you leave the grounds, you're vulnerable. House Mordain will learn you're helping me eventually. Until then, it's better if you stay hidden. So I'm basically under house arrest. You're under protection. There's a difference. His expression softened. Though I understand if it feels stifling. The grounds are extensive gardens, forest trails, a lake. You're free to explore. Just don't leave the property line. How will I know where that is? You'll feel it. The wards create a sensation like static electricity when you approach the boundary. Follow that feeling inward, and you'll stay safe. He left before she could ask more questions. The door clicking shut with quiet finality. Elena stood in the dead woman's room, surrounded by the remnants of a life cut short, and tried not to think about what she'd agreed to, about the danger she was courting by helping a vampire fight his ancient war. Instead, she focused on the work, on the documents waiting downstairs, full of lies she could expose, on the truth she could prove. If she was brave enough, she kicked off her shoes, collapsed onto the bed without bothering to change, and fell into dreamless sleep, while the morning sun painted golden patterns across the floor. When she woke, it would be evening again, and the real work would begin. But for now, in this quiet room that smelled of lavender and old grief, she let herself rest. Chapter 6. The revelation. Elena woke to darkness and the sound of rain against the windows. For a disoriented moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory returned. The manor, the documents, Adrian's grief-shadowed eyes as he spoke of his daughter. She checked her phone. 8:47 p.m. She'd slept nearly 12 hours. Hunger drove her downstairs, following the scent of cooking to a kitchen that somehow managed to blend 18th century architecture with modern appliances. Mrs. Chen stood at the stove, stirring something that made Elena's stomach growl. There you are, the older woman said warmly. I was wondering when you'd surface. Hungry? Starving. Good. Sit. Mrs. Chen gestured to a small table by the window. I made chicken soup. Real comfort food. You look like you need it. Elena sat gratefully, accepting the bowl Mrs. Chen placed before her. The soup was perfect, rich broth, tender meat, vegetables cooked just right. This is incredible. Thank you. My pleasure. It's nice to have someone to cook for again. Mrs. Chen poured tea, settled across from her. Mr. Ashvale doesn't eat obviously. Gets lonely, cooking for one. How long have you worked here? 42 years. Started as a housekeeper. When my husband died, needed work to support my daughter. Mr. Ashvale gave me a job, a place to live, helped put my girl through college. She smiled. He's a good man, despite what he is. Better than most humans I've known. Elena sipped her soup, curious. You don't find it strange? Living with a vampire? At first, sure. Terrifying, actually. But you learn quickly what someone's really like. He's never hurt me, never threatened me, treats me with respect, pays me well, gave me Christmas bonuses that put my daughter through medical school. She refilled Elena's tea. Whatever he's asked you to do, you can trust him to keep his word. He told you why I'm here. He tells me everything. Has to. I run this house, manage his affairs. Hard to do that without knowing what's happening. Mrs. Chen's expression grew serious. House Mordain is dangerous. They'll do anything to win. If you're going to help him, you need to understand that. He warned me. Good. Because they've already killed everyone else he loved. They won't hesitate to add you to that list. The words sent ice through Elena's chest, but before she could respond, she heard footsteps in the hall. Adrian appeared in the doorway, dressed in dark clothes that might have been contemporary or centuries old. It was hard to tell with him. You're awake, he said. Good. We have a problem. Mrs. Chen rose immediately. I'll bring coffee to the library. She squeezed Elena's shoulder as she passed. Stay sharp, dear. Elena followed Adrian through the manor to a room lined with books and dominated by a massive desk. He pulled up something on a laptop jarringly modern amid the antique furnishings and turned the screen toward her. This was posted 3 hours ago. It was a formal notice on an elaborately designed website. Court of Eternal Night official proceedings. Elena scanned the text, her stomach sinking. House Mordain hereby requests expedited examination of disputed documents. Claims that House Ashvale requires additional time suggest intentional delay and bad faith negotiation. Court hearing moved to 4 weeks from tonight. They cut your timeline by 2 weeks? Elena felt panic rising. Can they do that? Apparently. Mordain has 3 representatives on the court council. I have none. Adrian's jaw was tight. They're pushing this through before you have time to build a complete case. That's not enough time. I need to examine the original documents, run chemical analyses, cross-reference with your archives. I know. He scrubbed a hand through his hair, the first truly agitated gesture she'd seen from him. They know you're here. They must. And they're trying to force my hand before you can prove anything definitive. Elena's mind raced, reorganizing her timeline, prioritizing what was essential versus what would be ideal. The examination period, when is that? 10 days from now. 3 days of access to all disputed documents. Then that's where I focus. Everything until then goes to preparation, learning the documents from photographs, identifying the most questionable pieces, developing specific tests I can run quickly during examination. She stood, pacing. I'll need your archives immediately. Birth records, death certificates, any correspondence that references these supposed alliances. I'll have them in the laboratory within the hour, and I need you to tell me everything. Not just about the documents, about House Mordain, who they are, how they operate, what they're capable of. If I'm going to dismantle their case, I need to understand how they think. Adrian studied her for a long moment, something like admiration in his expression. You're not panicking. Panic wastes time. Action is better. Elena met his gaze. 4 weeks is tight, but it's possible. If we're strategic. If we work together. He said the word like it was foreign, fragile. I'm not accustomed to that anymore. Then get accustomed. Because you hired an expert, and experts don't work blindfolded. She crossed her arms. So start talking. Who runs House Mordain? He moved to a cabinet, pulled out a leather folder, and spread photographs across the desk. 3 faces stared up at her, 2 men and a woman, all beautiful in that unsettling way vampires were. Victor Mordain, head of house, 500 years old, ruthless and calculating. Adrian pointed to a man with sharp features and cold eyes. His brother Alexei, the strategist, less overtly cruel, but more dangerous. He's the one who likely orchestrated the forgeries. And her? Elena pointed to the woman, elegant, severe, with platinum hair and a smile like a knife. Celine Mordain, Victor's wife. She's the public face, handles court politics and alliances. Charming when she needs to be, vicious when charm fails. Adrian's voice hardened. She's also the one who brought the alchemical fire that killed my family. I can't prove it, but I know. Elena studied the photographs, memorizing faces. Why do they want your house so badly? It can't just be territory. It's not. House Ashvale sits on one of the oldest ley lines in this region, a source of natural power that makes our lands more fertile, our wards stronger. Control that, and you control significant magical resources. He traced a finger along the desk's edge. But more than that, we represent something they hate. My house always valued honor over expansion, protection over conquest. We were a reminder that vampires could be more than predators playing political games. Are. But I'm the last of us. If I fall, that ideal dies with me. The weight in his voice made her chest ache. Then we don't let you fall. He looked at her, really looked, and she saw the hope he was trying not to feel. You sound certain. I am. Because I've spent the last 12 hours examining their work, and they made mistakes. Small ones. But enough. These forgeries are good, Adrian. But they're not perfect. And perfect is what they needed to fool me. You can prove they're false? Given enough time and access to the originals? Yes, absolutely. She pulled out her notebook, flipped to her observations. The seal inconsistencies alone would be enough to raise questions. Combined with the historical impossibilities, your grandfather's supposed marriage after his death, the territorial claims that contradict contemporary records, we can build a compelling case. Adrian moved closer, reading over her shoulder. She could feel the coolness of him, the barely contained tension in his frame. Show me. For the next 3 hours, they work side by side. Elena walked him through each forgery, explaining what was wrong and why. He provided historical context, correcting dates she'd estimated, confirming suspicions about documents she'd questioned. It should have been awkward, working with someone who wasn't human. But instead, Elena found rhythm in it, her expertise complementing his memory, her analysis building on his experience. He asked intelligent questions. He understood her technical explanations. He trusted her judgment even when it contradicted his assumptions. Somewhere around midnight, Mrs. Chen brought more tea and sandwiches. Elena ate without stopping, making notes, reorganizing her approach. Adrian didn't eat, but he brought her fresh pencils when hers dulled, moved lamps to better illuminate the documents, adjusted the room temperature when she shivered. Small kindnesses, thoughtful gestures, like working with a partner, not an employer. This one, Adrian said suddenly, pointing to a photograph. This is the marriage contract you mentioned earlier. The one that bothers you most. Yes, it's technically perfect, but historically impossible. It's also personal. His voice went quiet. That's my grandfather's seal. His signature. I've seen it on dozens of genuine documents. Could someone have traced it? Used an authentic signature as a template? Possibly. But the wax seal, he leaned closer. The wax seal shows where patterns consistent with the actual stamp. Look here. This tiny crack in the line's mane. That was in the original seal, caused by a flaw in the metalwork. Elena's breath caught. They had access to the real seal? Or someone who could replicate it perfectly. He straightened, running calculations behind those pale eyes. Which means either they have a master forger with access to House Ashvale artifacts, or someone from your house betrayed you. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Adrian moved to the window, staring out at rain-drenched darkness. I thought I'd accounted for all possibilities, he said finally. But I hadn't considered that. Elena joined him at the window. Could it be true? Could someone you trusted have helped them? Everyone I trusted is dead. Chapter 7. The Seagoth attack came on the 8th night. Elena had fallen into a rhythm working through the evenings, sleeping through mornings, spending twilight hours walking the grounds with Adrian as he explained vampire politics and house histories. They'd been examining a particularly complex property deed when the ward screamed. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like a vibration that rattled through Elena's bones, making her teeth ache and her skin crawl with wrongness. Adrian was on his feet instantly, his controlled elegance replaced by predatory alertness. They're here. Who Mordain? They've found you. He crossed to a cabinet, pulled out something that gleamed silver in the lamplight. A dagger, ancient and wickedly sharp. Stay behind me. Don't run. If you run, their instincts will trigger. Terror flooded Elena's system. What do I do? Trust me. He pressed something into her hand, another blade, smaller, the handle wrapped in worn leather. Iron, blessed by old rituals. It won't kill them, but it will hurt enough to make them think twice. The windows exploded inward. Glass sprayed across the laboratory as 3 figures poured through, moving too fast. Too fluid, inhumanly graceful. Elena recognized them from the photographs. Victor, Alexei, and Celine Mordain. Victor landed in a crouch, his cold eyes fixing on Adrian. Ashvale, still clinging to your crumbling house, I see. Mordain, Adrian's voice was ice. Breaking ward law. The court will hear of this. The court will hear that we investigated reports of human trafficking. That we found you keeping a mortal woman prisoner. Celine smiled, beautiful and terrible. Such unfortunate optics, Adrian. Especially given your family's tragic history. She's here voluntarily. Under my protection. Is she? Alexei circled left, his movements calculated. Or have you enthralled her? Bent her will to serve your desperate cause? Elena found her voice, though fear made it shake. I'm here by choice. Working as a consultant. Consulting on what? Victor moved closer, and Adrian shifted to block him. What could a disgraced art curator possibly offer House Ashvale? They knew. Of course they knew. That's why they'd come, not to kill Adrian, but to eliminate her before she could prove their forgeries. Document authentication, Elena said, lifting her chin despite her terror. Which makes me wonder why that threatens you. Celine's smile sharpened. Bold little thing. I can see why Adrian likes you. She glanced at Adrian. Tell me, does she know what you are? Really? No? Does she understand that every kind word, every gentle gesture, is just a predator learning its prey? Enough. Adrian's voice cracked like a whip. You've violated ward law. You've threatened someone under my protection. Leave, now. Or what? Victor laughed. You'll fight us? 3 against 1. Even you aren't that foolish, Ashvale. No, but I'm that desperate. Adrian moved. Elena had seen him move before, that inhuman grace, that fluid speed. But this was different. This was violence unleashed, centuries of control stripped away to reveal the predator beneath. He hit Victor with enough force to send them both crashing through the wall into the hallway. Alexei lunged after them, and suddenly the laboratory was chaos, snarling, crashing. The sounds of combat that no human could survive. Celine remained, her attention fixed on Elena. You should run, little human. This isn't your fight. Actually, it is. Elena gripped the iron dagger, her hand steady despite her racing heart. Because I know what you did. I can prove those documents are forgeries. Can you? Celine tilted her head, considering. Prove it? How? To whom? Do you think the court will believe a human over 3 House representatives? She took a step forward. You're a convenient tool, nothing more. Adrian will use you until you're no longer useful, then discard you like he discarded his wife when she became inconvenient. That's a lie, is it? Ask him sometime about the night she died. Ask him why he wasn't there to protect her. Why he chose court politics over family. Another step. He's using you, Elena. Just like your mentor used you. Just like everyone in your life has used you. The words struck deep, hitting old wounds. But Elena had spent 3 months rebuilding herself from those wounds, learning to trust her own judgment again. You're trying to manipulate me, she said. Make me doubt him. It won't work. Won't it? Celine's eyes gleamed. You're already doubting. I can smell it on you, that uncertainty, that fear. You don't belong in this world, little human. You're fragile, breakable. One mistake, and you'll die screaming. A crash from the hallway, Victor thrown through another wall, Adrian following with inhuman fury. Blood splattered across the floor, dark and viscous. Elena couldn't tell whose it was. Celine used the distraction. She was on Elena in an instant, faster than thought, her hand around Elena's throat. Not squeezing, not yet, but the threat was clear. Drop the knife. Elena's fingers tightened on the hilt. Every instinct screamed to obey, to submit, to survive. But she'd spent too long being complicit in others' lies. Too long choosing safety over truth. She drove the iron blade upward, into Celine's side. The vampire shrieked, a sound that scraped along Elena's nerves like broken glass. Celine stumbled back, smoke rising from where the blessed iron had pierced her flesh. Not fatal, but agonizing. You little Adrian appeared behind Celine, his silver dagger pressed to her throat. Touch her again, and I'll show you exactly how much restraint I've been practicing. In the hallway, Victor and Alexei had frozen, watching. All 3 Mordanes were wounded, not badly, but enough. Enough to prove that Adrian, desperate and cornered, was still dangerous. This isn't over, Victor said, pulling himself upright. You've assaulted representatives of House Mordane. The court will hear of this. Good. Tell them how you violated ward law. How you broke into my home and threatened a mortal under my protection. Adrian's voice was steady, but Elena could see the tremor in his hands, the way he swayed slightly. He was hurt. Tell them how you attacked 3-on-1 because you're afraid of what she'll prove. We're not afraid of anything that pathetic human can, then why are you here? Elena stepped forward, ignoring Celine's hiss of fury. If the documents are authentic, what I discover won't matter. But you're terrified I'll expose you. That I'll prove you're liars and thieves who murdered an entire house to cover your fraud. Silence fell, heavy and electric. 7 days, Victor said finally. 7 days until the examination period. We'll be watching, little human. And if you step 1 foot off these grounds, ward law won't protect you. She won't need to leave, Adrian said. Everything I need is here. We'll see. Victor gestured to his siblings. Come. Let the desperate man and his pet human enjoy their final days together. They left through the shattered windows, disappearing into darkness with that unnatural speed. The moment they were gone, Adrian collapsed. Elena rushed to him, catching him before he hit the floor. His shirt was soaked with blood, too much blood. Oh God, you're hurt, I'll heal. His voice was strained. Vampires heal. Just need time. Mrs. Chen. Elena screamed. Mrs. Chen. Help. The housekeeper appeared, took 1 look at Adrian, and moved with practiced efficiency. Get him to his room. 3rd floor. End of the hall. I'll bring supplies. Together, they half carried Adrian through the manor. Elena had never been to the 3rd floor. It was his private space, she'd assumed. But now she saw his bedroom, surprisingly sparse. A bed he probably rarely used, a desk covered in papers, windows heavily curtained against accidental sunlight. They laid him on the bed, and Elena got her first real look at his injuries. Claw marks across his chest, deep and ragged. A bite on his shoulder, already blackening around the edges. Ribs that didn't sit quite right, suggesting fractures. He needs blood, Mrs. Chen said, returning with a medical kit. That's how they heal. Blood. Where the refrigerator? Bottom drawer. Medical grade. Stored for emergencies. Mrs. Chen began cleaning the wounds, her hands steady. Bring to bags. Elena ran, her mind reeling. The kitchen felt surreal after the violence upstairs. Normal, mundane, safe. She found the bags, red and clinical, and tried not to think about what they contained. When she returned, Adrian was conscious, but pale, his breathing labored. Mrs. Chen had removed his shirt, revealing the full extent of the damage. It looked like he'd been mauled. Here, Elena handed over the bags. Mrs. Chen didn't open them. Instead, she looked at Elena with gentle gravity. He needs fresh blood to heal properly. The stored stuff will keep him alive, but fresh. Fresh is better, especially from someone who trusts him. Understanding hit like cold water. You're asking me to. I'm not asking anything. Just explaining the options. Mrs. Chen stood. I'll give you privacy. Call if you need me. She left, and Elena was alone with a wounded vampire who'd fought 3 opponents to protect her. Adrian's eyes opened, focusing on her with obvious effort. Don't, he whispered. Don't feel obligated. The stored blood is fine, but she could see the pain in every line of his face, the way his body trembled with the effort of healing. Could see what it cost him to refuse, to give her the choice. Elena thought about trust, about the last 8 days, working side by side, about the way he'd taught her vampire history with patience, answered her questions without condescension, treated her like a partner rather than a tool, about the way he'd put himself between her and death. Without hesitation, she rolled up her sleeve. How do we do this? Chapter 8. The bond. Elena. No. Adrian tried to sit up, winced, fell back. You don't understand what you're offering. I understand you're hurt. I understand. You protected me. She sat on the edge of the bed, arm extended. Tell me how this works. It's not just feeding. Not when given freely, from the vein. His voice was strained. It creates a bond. Temporary, but real. You'll feel what I feel. I'll taste your emotions along with your blood. It's intimate. More intimate than you're prepared for. Will it hurt me? No, I won't take enough to weaken you. But you'll feel vulnerable, exposed. His eyes searched hers. Are you certain? Elena thought about the last 3 months, how betrayal had taught her to trust nothing, to protect herself above all else. How she'd built walls so high, even she couldn't see over them. But Adrian had asked permission for everything, had given her choice, even when desperate, had trusted her with his family's survival while expecting nothing in return but honesty. Maybe vulnerability wasn't weakness. Maybe it was the only path to something real. I'm certain. Then, he shifted carefully, making room beside him. Lie down. It's easier if you're relaxed. She stretched out next to him, acutely aware of his coolness, his stillness. He turned toward her, and she saw the conflict in his expression, hunger warring with restraint, need fighting against honor. Your wrist, he said softly. It's safest there. Less risk of taking too much. Elena offered her left wrist. His fingers circled it, gentle, despite his obvious weakness. His thumb traced her pulse point, and she felt her heartbeat accelerate. Breathe, he murmured. Trust me. Then he bit down. The pain was sharp but brief, a sting, then pressure, then something else entirely. Warmth spread from the bite, relaxing her muscles, quieting her racing thoughts. She felt his relief like cool water on burned skin, his gratitude washing over her in waves, and beneath it all, something deeper. Loneliness so profound it made her chest ache. Centuries of solitude, of loss, of being feared by those he tried to protect. The weight of immortality pressing down like stone. How do you survive this? She thought, knowing somehow he could sense the question. His answer came not in words but in feeling, memory of Catherine laughing, his wife's hand in his, moments of joy that sustained him through the darkness. And now, impossibly this, Elena's trust freely given. A human who saw him and chose not to run. The feeding lasted only minutes, but it felt infinite. When he finally pulled away, sealing the wound with careful strokes of his tongue, Elena felt dizzy, not from blood loss but from the intensity of connection. Thank you, Adrian whispered, his voice stronger already. The wounds on his chest were closing, flesh knitting together with visible speed. That was. Thank you. Elena touched her wrist, feeling only faint soreness where his teeth had been. I felt you. Your loneliness. Your grief. I know. I'm sorry. I tried to shield you from it, but the bond don't apologize. She met his gaze. I asked. I chose. And I'm glad I know. He stared at her like she'd done something impossible. Most humans who experience the bond pull away. They can't handle that much rawness, that much truth. Most humans haven't had their lives destroyed by beautiful lies. Elena sat up slowly, testing her balance. Slightly lightheaded, but fine. Truth doesn't scare me anymore. Even when it hurts. Adrian sat up too, his movements careful, but no longer pained. The worst of his injuries had healed, leaving only fading bruises and half-closed cuts. You should rest. The bond will fade in a few hours, but until then you'll be more sensitive to emotions, mine and your own. What about you? I'll heal completely by morning. He looked at her wrist again, something complicated in his expression. Elena, what you did, offering blood to a vampire creates obligations in our world. Debts that must be repaid. I don't want repayment. I wanted to help. I know, which makes it more precious. He touched her wrist gently, reverently. But in vampire law, I now owe you blood debt. If you ever need protection, resources, anything within my power, it's yours. No questions, no conditions. That seems excessive for a pint of blood. It's not the blood. It's the trust. The choice to make yourself vulnerable when you could have refused. His thumb traced the fading mark. Very few humans would do what you just did. The moment felt suspended, fragile. Elena was acutely aware of how close they were, how the bond still hummed between them, quieter now, but present. She could feel his gratitude, yes, but beneath it something else. Something warmer, more dangerous. Attraction, desire, ruthlessly controlled, but undeniably there. I should go, she said, though she didn't move. Let you rest. Yes, you should. But his hand remained on her wrist, and neither of them pulled away. The silence stretched, heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Adrian released her, putting deliberate space between them. The examination period starts in 3 days. We need to finalize your testing strategy. Back to business. Back to safety. Elena stood, grateful for the excuse to move. I'll have a plan ready by tomorrow evening. Good. And Elena? He caught her gaze. What you felt through the bond, the loneliness, the grief, that's not your burden to carry. Don't let it change how you see this arrangement. This arrangement, she repeated the words, testing them. Is that what we're calling it? What else would we call it? Partnership, alliance, something more. But she couldn't name it. Not yet. Not when the bond still whispered between them, and her wrist still tingled where his mouth had been. I don't know, she admitted. But whatever it is, it's not just business anymore. His expression shifted, surprise, then something that might have been hope quickly hidden. No, suppose it's not. Elena returned to her room as dawn approached, exhausted but unable to sleep. The bond had faded to a whisper, but she could still feel echoes of Adrian's emotions, still taste the depth of his isolation. She'd thought she understood loneliness. 3 months of being shunned by the art world had taught her what it meant to be alone. But that was nothing compared to centuries of watching everyone you loved die, of being feared for what you were rather than seen for who you'd become. How did he survive it? How did anyone survive that much loss without becoming the monster everyone assumed them to be? The answer, she realized, was, some didn't. Some became Victor and Celine, cruel, calculating, playing games with mortal lives because nothing else mattered anymore. They'd lost their humanity, not to vampirism, but to time itself, to the slow erosion of empathy that came from outliving everything they'd once cared about. Adrian had survived by holding on to something they'd lost, hope. The belief that honor still mattered, that protection meant something. That one person choosing trust could justify centuries of restraint. Don't let me become them. She'd felt through the bond, a plea so desperate it had broken her heart. Don't let me forget why any of this matters. She wouldn't, she couldn't, because somewhere in the last 8 days, this had stopped being about proving herself and started being about saving someone who deserved saving. Elena pulled out her notebooks, began refining her examination strategy. 3 days until she could access the original documents. 3 weeks until the hearing. Enough time. If she was smart. If she was thorough. If House Mordain didn't kill her first. Outside her window, Mrs. Chen was surveying the damaged, shattered glass, splintered wood, the evidence of violence barely contained. The older woman moved with practiced efficiency, already calling contractors, already restoring order. How many times had she done this? How many attacks had this house survived? Elena returned to her work, but couldn't shake the feeling that last night had changed something fundamental. The bond had faded, yes, but its echo remained, a connection that hummed just beneath conscious thought, making her aware of Adrian even rooms away. She could feel him resting, healing, his presence like a cool shadow at the edge of her perception. Not intrusive, not controlling, just there, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. By the time evening came again, Elena had her plan finalized. 23 specific tests she could run during the 3-day examination period. 12 historical inconsistencies she could prove through Adrian's archives. 5 key documents that, if exposed as forgeries, would collapse Mordane's entire case. It was solid work. Professional, the kind of analysis that had made her one of the best authenticators in the field before the scandal. She found Adrian in the library, reading by lamplight, looking fully healed. He glanced up as she entered, and she felt that echo of connection flare, his relief at seeing her, his continued gratitude, his careful restraint over everything else. I have the plan, she said, holding up her notebook. 23 tests, 3 days. It's aggressive but manageable. He set down his book. Show me. They worked through dinner, through midnight, through the small hours when the manor settled into silence. Mrs. Chen brought food for Elena, tea for them both, then disappeared to let them focus. It felt natural now, working side by side, finishing each other's thoughts, building strategies together. The partnership they'd claimed from the beginning had become real, strengthened by the bond they'd shared and the violence they'd survived. This one, Adrian pointed to a document photograph. The 1,500 to territorial grant. If you can prove this is forged, it invalidates 3 other claims that depend on it. The linchpin. Elena made a note. I'll prioritize it during examination. Chapter 9. The examination court of eternal night existed beneath the city. In catacombs older than America itself, Elena descended stone steps worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Adrian beside her, Mrs. Chen following with equipment cases. The air grew colder with each level, until Elena's breath misted and her fingers went numb despite her gloves. Stay close, Adrian murmured. The court is neutral ground, but Mordane will test boundaries. They emerged into a vast chamber lit by torches that burned without smoke. The walls were carved with symbols Elena didn't recognize. Old magic, older than Christianity, older than Rome. Vampires moved through the space with predatory grace, their conversations hushed, their eyes tracking every newcomer. Elena felt their attention like pressure against her skin, felt herself catalogued, assessed, dismissed as merely human, prey among predators. Mr. Ashvale, a woman approached, ancient, dignified, wearing robes that suggested official capacity. Your examination period begins now. 3 days as stipulated. All disputed documents are in the archive chamber. You may bring your consultant. The pause before consultant dripped with disdain. Thank you, Magistrate Thorne. Adrian's voice was carefully neutral. We appreciate the court's accommodation. They followed her through corridors that twisted like intestines, past chambers where other vampires conducted business she couldn't fathom. Finally, they reached a room lined with glass cases, each containing documents sealed against time and touch. Victor, Alexei, and Celine stood waiting. Ashvale. Victor's smile was sharp. And the pet human. How quaint. She has a name, Adrian said quietly, and rights under court law to examine these documents without interference. Of course. We wouldn't dream of interfering. Celine's gaze fixed on Elena's wrist, where the faint mark of Adrian's bite still showed. Though I see you've been feeding him. How generous. Heat flooded Elena's cheeks, but she refused to look away. The documents, please. I have 3 days and 23 tests to complete. Magistrate Thorne gestured to the cases. You may handle the documents with gloves. No photography. No removal from this chamber. House Mordane's representatives have the right to observe. Understood. Elena pulled on the white cotton gloves she'd brought. Approached the first case. Inside lay the 15-0 to territorial grant, the linchpin document. Parchment yellowed with age, elaborate calligraphy, wax seals that looked disturbingly authentic. She'd studied the photographs for days, but seeing the original made her stomach clench. It looked real. It looked perfect. Focus, she told herself. You know what to look for. She had the case opened, the document carefully extracted. Her portable UV light came out first, a simple test, but revealing. Authentic period ink fluoresced differently than modern forgeries. The document glowed under the light. Wrong color. Too uniform. Interesting, she murmured, making notes. The ink shows characteristics of 20th century manufacture. Specifically, synthetic compounds introduced in the 1940s. That's impossible, Alexei said smoothly. That document has been in our family vault for 5 centuries. Then your family vault has remarkable access to time travel. Elena moved to the next test, paper fiber analysis using a handheld microscope. Because this paper, while genuinely old, shows fibers consistent with late medieval manufacture. But the ink is definitely modern. She's lying. Celine hissed. Am I? Elena looked up. Would you like me to test the other documents? See if they show the same anachronisms? Silence fell, tense and electric. Continue your examination, Magistrate Thorne said. The court will review all findings objectively. For the next 8 hours, Elena worked methodically through the documents. Victor and his siblings watched like hawks, occasionally objecting, always hovering. Adrian stood guard, saying little, but his presence was a wall between her and their hostility. Some documents were genuine treaties and agreements that had nothing to do with the current dispute. But the crucial ones, the territorial claims and marriage contracts, showed consistent problems. Modern ink on old paper. Seals that matched perfectly, without the natural variations of hand-stamped wax. Handwriting that mimicked period style but included anachronistic letter formations. They used authentic materials, Elena explained to Adrian during a brief break. Probably salvaged blank parchment from the period, authentic seals somehow acquired or perfectly replicated. But they couldn't resist using modern ink. It's more stable, easier to work with. They assumed no one would test for it. Will the court accept this evidence? If I can replicate the results consistently across multiple documents? Yes, it's solid forensic analysis. And if Mordain challenges your credentials? Claims you're biased? Elena smiled grimly. Then we point out that I'm the expert who exposed the Rembrandt forgery in 2022, authenticated the disputed Caravaggio last year, and have testimony from 3 major museums supporting my methodology. I may be disgraced in the art world, but my technical skills were never questioned. By the end of day 1, she'd examined 8 documents. 6 showed clear signs of forgery. 2 were authentic, but irrelevant to territorial disputes. As they packed up for the night, Celine approached. You're wasting your time, she said pleasantly. Even if you prove these documents are false, it changes nothing. House Ashvale is dying. Adrian is alone. The court understands that houses without heirs cannot survive. Then why forge documents? Elena met her gaze. If you're so certain of victory, why manufacture evidence? Celine's smile never wavered. Insurance. We prefer not to leave outcomes to chance. No, you prefer to murder families and steal their legacy while hiding behind false legitimacy. Elena stepped closer, surprised by her own boldness. But I'm going to expose exactly what you are. And when I do, the court will see you're not just thieves. You're cowards. For a moment, Celine's composure cracked. Her eyes flashed with something feral, dangerous. Then Victor's hand landed on her shoulder. Come, sister. Let the human have her fantasy. 3 weeks from now, House Ashvale will be history, and she'll be forgotten. He looked at Adrian. Enjoy your final days together. They're all you have left. They left, and Elena released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. That was brave, Adrian said quietly. Also potentially suicidal. She killed your family. Your daughter. I'm not going to pretend respect. I don't feel. His expression softened. Catherine would have liked you. Your fire. Your refusal to bend. Tell me about her. Really? Tell me, not just the facts. They walked through the catacombs toward the exit, and Adrian spoke. About Catherine's laugh, her fierce intelligence, her determination to reform vampire law from within. About teaching her to hunt ethically, to see humans as people rather than prey. About the night he'd turned her, desperate to save her from fever, and his wife's fury at the choice. Margaret never forgave me, he said, as they climbed toward the surface. She understood why I did it, but she'd wanted Catherine to have a human life. Marriage, children, a natural death. I took that from her. You gave her 63 more years, yes, but were they happy years? Or did I curse her to decades of hunting, hiding, watching friends age while she remained frozen? He paused at the exit, looking back at the torchlit depths. I'll never know. She died before we could truly reconcile. Elena touched his arm. She fought beside you. She studied law to help your house. That's not the behavior of someone who resented her existence. Perhaps. He covered her hand with his. Thank you for caring enough to ask, Mrs. Chen was waiting in the car, heater running. Elena collapsed into the back seat, exhausted but exhilarated. 1 day down, 2 to go, and she had solid evidence already. How did it go? Mrs. Chen asked. 6 forgeries identified. 17 more documents to examine. Elena pulled out her notebook, reviewing her findings. If the next 2 days go this well, we'll have an airtight case. If Mordain doesn't sabotage you first, Mrs. Chen said grimly. That Celine creature looked ready to tear your throat out. She can try. Elena surprised herself with the venom in her voice. But I'm not running. Not this time. Adrian said nothing, but she felt his approval through the fading echo of their bond, pride in her courage. Gratitude for her dedication, and beneath it all, that carefully controlled warmth she'd felt before, desire, connection, the slow recognition that what existed between them had deepened into something neither had planned. They drove through the night, leaving the city's lights behind, returning to the manor that felt increasingly like home rather than refuge. Elena should have been frightened. She'd just openly challenged 3 ancient vampires in their own territory. Should have been planning her escape, her return to normal life. Instead, she was planning tomorrow's examination strategy, thinking about which documents to prioritize, how to present her findings for maximum impact, thinking about Adrian's hand over hers, his voice as he spoke of his daughter, the way he'd stood guard all day without complaint, thinking that maybe, impossibly, she'd found something worth fighting for in this strange world of darkness and blood, something worth staying for. Even when staying meant dancing with death, the second day brought new challenges. Victor had filed a formal objection, claiming Elena's examination methods were invasive and potentially damaging the priceless historical documents. Magistrate Thorne reviewed the complaint, then dismissed it with barely concealed annoyance. Chapter 10. The Shoiseth hearing was set for midnight vampire time. When the Court of Eternal Night held its full power, Elena spent the final week preparing her presentation, organizing evidence into irrefutable sequences, practicing her testimony until every word was precise. Adrian provided historical context, cross-referenced dates, helped her anticipate Mordain's counterarguments. They worked late into each night, the manor silent around them, except for the scratch of pen on paper and the quiet rustle of turning pages. Mrs. Chen brought meals Elena barely tasted, tea that went cold while she refined her conclusions. You need to rest, Adrian said on the night before the hearing. You'll be testifying for hours tomorrow. You need to be sharp. I am sharp. Elena rubbed her eyes, fighting exhaustion. I just need to review the 1450 marriage contract one more time, Elena. He crossed to her desk, gently closed the notebook. You know this material better than anyone alive, including me. You've done everything possible. Now you need to trust that it's enough. She looked up at him, seeing the concern in his expression. 3 weeks of working side by side had created an intimacy that went beyond the blood bond they'd shared. She knew his habits now, the way he paced when thinking, the slight crease between his brows when worried, the rare smile that transformed his face from merely beautiful to devastatingly human. What if it's not enough? She whispered. What if the court doesn't believe me? What if Mordain has some trick we haven't anticipated? Then we've still done everything we could. With honor, with truth. He pulled a chair beside hers, sat so they were eye level. 3 weeks ago I was alone, hopeless, certain that my house would die with me. You changed that. Win or lose tomorrow, you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. What? Hope, partnership, the memory of what it feels like to not be alone. His hand covered hers on the desk. Thank you for that. Whatever happens, Elena turned her hand over, lacing her fingers with his. His skin was cool, but not cold, steady and solid. I'm not ready for this to be over. Neither am I. The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. They'd avoided this conversation for 3 weeks, both focused on survival, on the work, on anything except the connection building between them with each shared evening. Adrian. As she stopped, unsure how to voice what she felt, fear and attraction tangled together, trust and terror, the certainty that crossing this line would change everything. I know. He squeezed her hand gently. I feel it too. Have felt it since you kept my wallet safe, since you chose integrity over profit, since you offered blood without hesitation. His thumb traced her knuckles. But this world is dangerous, Elena. I'm dangerous. Not because I want to be, but because of what I am. What I'll always be. You've never hurt me. Not yet. But the bond we shared, that was temporary. If this becomes more, the connection would deepen. Permanent. You'd be tied to me in ways that would make you vulnerable to my enemies. To my nature. What if I'm willing to risk that? His eyes searched hers, and she saw the longing there quickly suppressed. 3 weeks ago, you were alone, betrayed, trying to rebuild a shattered life. Don't make permanent decisions based on temporary circumstances. You think this is temporary? What I feel? I think you're grateful. I think proximity and danger create false intimacy. I think he stopped, jaw tightening. I think I've lived long enough to know the difference between infatuation and genuine connection. And I won't let you mistake one for the other, no matter how much I want to. The honesty in his voice broke her heart. So what are you saying? I'm saying wait, win this case tomorrow. Return to your life, rebuild your career. If in 6 months you still feel this way, if you still want to explore what's between us, then we'll talk. But not now. Not when you're exhausted and frightened, and dependent on me for safety. It was the right answer. The honorable answer. Exactly what someone who truly cared about her well-being would say. Elena hated it. And if I don't want to wait 6 months? His smile was sad. Then I'll spend 6 months hoping you don't change your mind. The court of eternal night assembled in its full glory for the hearing. Elena had never seen so many vampires in one place, dozens, perhaps hundreds, filling the vast chamber in elegant dress that spanned centuries of fashion. They arranged themselves by house affiliation, their positions reflecting complex political hierarchies. She couldn't begin to understand. House Mordain sat on the left, Victor at the center, flanked by his siblings. They looked confident, relaxed, like people who'd already won. House Ashvale's section was nearly empty, just Adrian, Mrs. Chen, and Elena, a visual reminder of how far the house had fallen, how alone Adrian truly was. Magistrate Thorne called the session to order, her voice carrying through the chamber without amplification. We gather to adjudicate disputed territorial claims between House Mordain and House Ashvale. House Mordain asserts historical precedent based on documented agreements spanning for centuries. House Ashvale contests the validity of said documents. Victor rose, presenting his case with practiced eloquence. He spoke of ancient alliances, of territories fairly won, of records meticulously preserved. He produced witnesses, vampires who claimed to remember the agreements, who testified to the legitimacy of Mordain's claims. It was a masterful performance. Confident, detailed, backed by what appeared to be overwhelming evidence. Then it was Elena's turn. She stood before the assembled court, a lone human among predators, and felt every eye upon her, felt the weight of their attention, their skepticism, their assumption that she was irrelevant. Magistrate Thorne, members of the court, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I'm here to prove that House Mordain's territorial claims rest on a foundation of lies, of documents carefully forged using authentic materials but modern techniques, of a conspiracy to erase House Ashvale through fraud rather than honest challenge. She presented her evidence methodically. UV light analysis showing modern ink compounds, microscopic examination revealing anachronistic paper fibers, historical records proving the impossibility of claimed events. 16 documents, each one dismantled piece by piece until the forgery was undeniable. Victor objected repeatedly. Alexei questioned her credentials. Celine suggested human error, bias, manipulation by Adrian. Elena countered each challenge with data, with methodology accepted by international forensic standards, with the calm certainty of someone who knew their expertise was unimpeachable. Hours passed. The evidence mounted. The court's skepticism shifted to interest, then to concern. Finally, Magistrate Thorne called for recess. The court will deliberate. Both parties will be summoned when we've reached a decision. They withdrew to a waiting chamber. Adrian, Elena, and Mrs. Chen, the older woman, produced tea from somewhere, pressed a cup into Elena's shaking hands. You were magnificent, Adrian said quietly. Brilliant, unshakable. Was it enough? I don't know. The evidence is overwhelming. But Mordain has influence. Political capital I lack, he paced, tension evident in every line of his body. The court may decide that even if the documents are forged, House Ashvale's isolation and lack of heirs makes us non-viable. They may absorb my territories into Mordain anyway, for administrative efficiency. That's not justice. No, but vampire law is complicated. Justice and politics often conflict. 2 hours later, they were summoned back to the chamber. Magistrate Thorne's expression was unreadable as she addressed the assembly. The court has reviewed the evidence presented by both parties. We find that Miss Markov's forensic analysis is sound, her methodology rigorous, and her conclusions supported by objective data. Elena's heart soared. However, Thorne continued, and her stomach dropped. The question before us is not merely whether documents are authentic, but whether House Ashvale remains viable. A house without heirs, without allies, without the strength to defend its territories. Such a house cannot fulfill its obligations to the greater vampire community. No, Elena whispered. Therefore, this court finds in favor of House Mordain regarding territorial absorption. However, Thorne's gaze swept to Victor. The forgery of official documents is a serious crime. House Mordain will face sanctions, financial penalties, loss of court voting privileges for 1 decade. Victor's face darkened, but he bowed. The court's wisdom is acknowledged. Furthermore, Thorne said, looking now at Adrian, House Ashvale is granted 1 year to demonstrate viability, recruit allies, establish heirs, prove that your house can continue to serve its traditional role. If within 12 months you cannot show renewed strength, these territories will transfer to House Mordain as originally ruled. It wasn't victory, but it wasn't complete defeat either. The court is adjourned. They drove back to the manor in silence, each processing what had happened. Elena had proven the forgeries beyond doubt, had exposed Mordain's crimes, but it wasn't enough. Adrian still faced an impossible task: rebuild an entire house in 12 months or lose everything. I'm sorry, she said finally. I thought if I proved the truth you gave me a year. 12 months I wouldn't have had without you. Adrian's voice was quiet, but not defeated. That's not nothing. It's not enough either. No, but it's a chance. More than I had before. Mrs. Chen dropped them at the manor entrance. I'll give you to some privacy. You have things to discuss. She disappeared into the house, leaving them alone under stars that had watched countless human and vampire dramas play out across centuries. What will you do? Elena asked. Recruit, rebuild, try to prove House Ashvale deserves to survive. He turned to her. What will you do? The question hung heavy between them. Elena thought about her tiny apartment, her graveyard shift at the diner, the art world that had cast her out. Thought about the last 3 weeks, the work that had consumed her, the partnership that had fulfilled her, the man who'd given her back her sense of purpose. Adrian, about what you said before. About waiting 6 months, I meant it. You should go home. Rebuild your career. Make sure this is what you want, and not just it's what I want. She stepped closer. I know my own mind. I know the difference between gratitude and genuine feeling. And I know that for the first time in months, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. His expression showed conflict, hope warring with honor. Elena, if you stay, if you tie yourself to House Ashvale, you become a target. Mordain will see you as leverage against me. Other houses will view you as weakness to exploit, or they'll see me as proof that House Ashvale is rebuilding. That you have human allies, mortal connections, someone who chose to stand beside you despite the danger. She took his hands. You said you need to demonstrate viability. Show the court that your house can still serve its purpose. How better than to have a human consultant who helps adjudicate disputes, who brings outside expertise to vampire politics. You'd stay? Knowing what it means. I'd stay. Not as your employee, as your partner. In building whatever House Ashvale becomes next. He stared at her like she'd offered him the world. The bond would deepen. If we do this, truly do this, you'd be connected to me in ways that would change you. Not vampirism, not unless you chose it, but connection nonetheless. I understand. And you still want this? I want truth. I want purpose. I want to stand beside someone who values honor over power. She smiled. And yes, I want you. Adrian pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. Then stay. Help me rebuild. Be the first member of House Ashvale's new generation. On one condition. Name it. No more telling me what I should want. No more deciding my feelings for me. If we're partners, we're equals. His laugh was soft, genuine. Agreed. Equal partners. Then yes. I'll stay. He kissed her then, cool lips against hers, gentle and reverent. The bond between them flared to life deeper this time, more permanent, a connection that would tie them together across whatever came next. When they finally pulled apart, dawn was breaking over the manor. Adrian would need to retreat from the light soon, but for this moment, they stood together on the threshold of something new. 12 months, Elena said. Let's show them what House Ashvale can become. Together, Adrian agreed. Whatever comes, we face it together. And as the sun rose over the ancient manor, Elena Mark of disgraced art curator turned vampire house consultant stepped fully into a world of darkness and found, impossibly, her own kind of light.